Hi everyone, thanks for joining us. I'm gonna give it a minute or two so people can join and then we'll get started. All right, I just see the numbers staying pretty the same, so I'm gonna go ahead and get started. Thanks for joining us for our second in the webinar series, Insights from the Machine Actionable Plans or MAP pilots. So today, my name is Maria Praetzellis. I'm with the California Digital Library. I am joined by Kat Koziar, previously from the University of California, Riverside, and now at Cal State Fresno, and Matthew Murray from the University of Colorado Boulder. I also want to acknowledge the hard work of several of our other project members, including Becky Grady and John Shidaki from CDL, Cynthia Hudson Vitale, and Judy Ruttenberg, both from ARL. So today I'll offer a quick introduction to the program. I know many folks attended our first webinar, so I will be brief in this section. Then we will move on to our two partners from UC Riverside and then CU Boulder. Finally, I'll talk about some of the common themes that we saw across all of the pilot partners and then wrap up for any questions. So starting at the very beginning, very quickly, in case anyone's new to this conversation, a machine actionable data management and sharing plan is just a structured machine readable version of the traditional text-based plan. So machine actionable DMPs enable automation, integration with administrative and research workflows, and importantly, it allows the data management plan to be a living version document that is automatically updatable over time. The project that we're talking about today was funded by the IMLS, and our goal was to test machine actionable features and functionalities in institutional settings. So to see what happens when people start using machine actionable DMPs or planning out different workflows at their institutions. We were sort of in our active pilot phase from January through December of 2024. We're now wrapping up the project, doing things like these webinars and writing some of our final reports. So again, the objective was really to showcase the potential of machine actionable DMPs. So the California Digital Library and ARL have been very active in supporting machine actionable DMPs for a number of years, including from the very beginning, gathering use cases, developing technical standards, really working internationally with other DMP authoring platforms. So the goal of this project was really to take a lot of the theory, all of the sort of initial technical development that we had been working on, and put it into practice. So we had 10 project partners working with us on this. Our original funding only actually covered 4, but we had such a great response to our call for applications that we expanded the cohort so we could work with more folks and get more feedback, more ideas, and more examples. So with that, I'm going to move it over to Kat, and she can talk about the University of California, Riverside's example.
Thank you. Next slide. And next slide. Excellent, thanks. Hi, I'm Kat Koziar. The project at UC Riverside focused on 2 areas. The first was investigating the space of how DMPs support providing and gathering metadata required to deploy computing resources for research projects. We wanted to create a pipeline between machine actionable DMPs and a research workflow using the DMP as a source of truth. The second area we worked on was to help track research outputs and to create automatic notifications to campus stakeholders. The UCR team represented three divisions: Office of Research and Economic Development, the College of Engineering, and the library. We had some challenges midway through the project as I took on a new position at Fresno State, but was able to stay and coordinate the project. On the next slide, we connect our project goals with our implementation and outcome, which is a proof of concept application that integrates with the DMP API to pull in DMP information and provides a portal to deploy virtual machines using Google Cloud Platform. The app also provides notification and tracking for various approvals and again, our initial investigation was on sensitive data. On the next slide, I highlight the part of the project, which is the focus for this webinar, which is deploying computational resources. And before I talk about our solution and the app a little more in depth, I want to provide more background on this aspect of our project and tell a little more of its story. Next slide, please. My original pitch when I was looking for team partners to create UCR's project proposal was to focus on active data storage. That is, usually like where does your research data lay in your infrastructure while it is being actively created or used, et cetera, et cetera. Use and tracking of active storage is a known issue that I hear mentioned time and time again when I'm in meetings that also include research computing folks. Issues are running out of storage space, setting limits, knowing when and how to reclaim space. And these issues are ubiquitous in higher education. I heard them at UCR. I hear them again here at Fresno State. And I think that is really a useful way for machine actionable DMPs. And since researchers use whatever storage space is available to them, that means research data, active research data, and data that is under a retention schedule are on a myriad of storage locations that should be indicated on a DMP, which means that a machine actionable DMP can help with those problems, especially whenever you want to try to reclaim storage space. And that was my pitch. I went to our UCR's research computing and I said, wouldn't it be great if you knew when you could actually get that data back or that storage space back? And they said, we don't have the bandwidth for this. It's a really big challenge. Can you please talk with Victor Hill instead? He's working on a way to deploy computational resources using a command line script. And that's how our project actually started. Victor was interested in the project. The thing is, there weren't any known challenges at the time for doing this part of it. We just, the biggest one was how do you create a research workflow that includes machine actionable DMP as a point to implement and document whatever we can as part of the research project. And that's what we mean when we talk about a source of truth. Like, how do you keep track of all of those things and what is true about the project then and at that point, and what was true prior, because things change. And yeah, that's where we started with the technical aspect of our project. We really kept it open-ended and investigated what we could, and eventually developed a proof of concept app as a control structure that's connected to many things on campus, as well as the DMP tool that hosts the machine actionable DMPs. On the next slide, we see some screenshots of the app. It pulls information from the machine actionable DMP that's hosted on the DMP tool, including an overview of the project, funding sources, and all of the other information that's gathered by the DMP tool. This reduces the burden on PIs because now there's one place for them to view many things associated with the project. The next slide shows deploying computational resources. Our original idea was to deploy the resources based on scripts because that's what Victor had developed to basically do at the command line. And that he was using them to deploy on-prem or on-premises campus server resources. We pivoted to focusing on GCP or Google Cloud Platform because the campus ITS was working on a method for tracking and approval of GCP instances. And the benefit of that is it's able to keep track of detailed metadata, which is often required for rep reproducibility, replicability of research. We had some early conversations about bitwise reproducibility, and then we quickly decided not to focus on that because that's too big of a problem. And we looked at the larger concept of let's just deploy the resources and how automated can that be? Because we weren't even sure if it would be 100% automated. That's our goal, but like that's the whole point of this, investigate. The aspects of GCP actually require manual selection at this point. And there is a benefit to that manual selection because it puts a break in place, a place where it will allow campus ITS to review the requests for provisioning and make sure that we're not being overcharged. The next slide demonstrates a tracking and commenting system. We tested out various prompts for Google's LLM Gemini to gather detailed information, but unfortunately, the DMPs lacks the specificity needed to provide granular information to deploy resources. So instead, what we created the app to do is centralize tracking and comments so the prompts and responses can be documented. Next slide, please. And what we needed to do is we needed to track the prompt information because we found, there wasn't enough information in the DMPs to broadly provide usable resources. So Victor worked on this prompt, which this good enough Gemini prompt to test out the LLM's ability to make recommendations. It's pretty detailed. And then you feed in that and then the DMP JSON at the next part of it, which we can't put on here because it's giant. Next slide, please. Right, so this is where we have the actual Google, the Gemini responses. And in 2024, it did a pretty good job. We like this. This response is actually like verbatim. It broke it up this way in terms of like recommending the virtual machine. We say VM is virtual machine. So the instant type, the how much storage space does it need, etc. Next slide, please. Other information, other security and contact information. Now compare that with on the next slide is I put in the exact same prompt, the exact same JSON file, and like 2 months ago, I want to say, and this was now Gemini's response. It's a little less like this response actually requires even more computing in order to pull out metadata for your different instances. It also did, and I went ahead and I annotated it a little bit on the next two slides. So let's go to the next slide because that's just like a chunk of text. We don't like reading all of that as humans. Things that it did well on it, the VM instance was pretty much the same. Storage, it actually increased. And I think like Victor and I talked a little bit about what the storage needs really were, and they really don't know based on the DMP information. There isn't enough information to actually make a good guess. So the LLM just sort of makes an educated guess based off of what it has at that point, or, tries to predict the next word, which is what they do. Next slide, please. I think one of the things that Victor and I thought was really interesting was that under the additional information needed, the more current LLM basically didn't give as much detailed information because in 2024, it said, hey, contact the PI of this project because the PI's information was there. And now it's like, yeah, you don't really need that. It's like, So, I mean, it's not just that this demonstrates not just that using a machine actionable DMP as a work in progress to, create more granular or more detailed information so you can get more granular information out of it. But it's also going to be changing based off of, overall how the AIs, how the chatbots and generative AIs are being developed, that it's going to be constantly changing. So that's a good challenge going forward. Next slide, please. All right. This now has, we're back to our app, and this is what I think is the best outcome for UCR's project, which is this notification and tracking system for campus stakeholders. And I've already discussed, DMPs aren't standalone documents. They provide a plan that should be integrated with other parts of the campus. And because everything is interconnected, and this helps us make actually like really good, smart choices going forward, especially whenever you're having to budget things, buy equipment, and all of that. And so what this does is it allows tracking of all of the things that are are part of that project throughout the project. And that way you have all of the things that would normally be an email and stuck in somebody's inbox are now here in one place that everyone can go and look at, and keeps track of all of those communications, and not just where our initial investigation was on the data security plans, but then we, threw in having conversations with campus research computing and systems, and that can be expanded to whoever else needs to be involved with the project. And so that really is really useful. The next slide has our key takeaways and next steps. What happened is that the project allowed a broad understanding of what DMPs are across divisions. Before the project, most people had more of a general understanding of the idea, the concept of what a DMP are. They didn't really understand how they really can benefit researchers, because often they were just seen, DMPs are just seen as a burden because it's just a checkbox to complete. That our conversations really went into, well, what would it look like if we changed that? How can we make it more detailed so it can be of use? And how can we implement something that based off of that? So we were able to, look at what are the more granular details that we can get from them and what are the challenges with that. And part of that also had to do with data security. Now, and data security isn't just, human subject data, but when we were talking about GCP instances, we were talking about who has access to what, because GCP instances usually they'll have like a lot of detailed information, including an IP address. And you can't have that be publicly available, because that provides a vector of attack whenever you're looking at things in terms of cybersecurity. So we went and we developed something in between. Now, the key to the success of this, in my opinion, is that the library is a neutral stakeholder who has a broad understanding of how information and DMPs integrate with the larger campus research support services. UCR's next step is creating a campus level research computing portal that will keep track of everything that we mentioned today, and as well as in the previous webinar. And if I were still at UCR, I would be implementing institutional change to make DMPs more robust to provide detailed reproducibility. A next step of mine here at Fresno State is to talk with people about DMPs and machine actionable DMPs, because my year here, they've been saying the same challenges that I heard at UCR. And I keep on thinking that a DMP and a machine actionable DMP might help with their their problems. So I started conversations with that here. But the main thing is we needed to be flexible with our approach and our end goals. And also, keep open communication about our challenges and our main goal and have a positive mindset for trying to find solutions. And that's it for me. And next we're going to hear from Matthew at University of Colorado Boulder.
Hello. Next slide. So yes, I'm at the University of Colorado Boulder. I'm in the Center for Research Data and Digital Scholarship, or CRDDS. This project was led by Andrew Johnson, who was the person that gave the first of these presentations, if you were at that one. But we also had Adi Ranganath, Thea Linguist, Barb Schnell, Leah Freeborn, and Shelley Knuth from CRDDS. The last three of those are from the research computing side of CRDDS, and the first four are from the library side. So it's a joint department in that way. We also had folks from other parts of the university libraries, Vita, Sam, and Jamie. And then we also had a great connection with Doug from the Laboratory for Atmospheric and Space Physics, because we have a lot of NASA-funded research, and we wanted to use those as one of the examples, which turned out to be quite an undertaking in some ways. And we also worked with the Research and Innovation Office and the Faculty Information Systems. So next slide. So our original goals were to create automated alerts for CRDDS when our personnel or infrastructure resources are included in data management and sharing plans from awarded proposals. So for example, a awarded proposal mentions our institutional repository, it mentions large-scale secure data storage systems, the high-powered computing infrastructure, AI and cloud computing resources, and so forth. We wanted to leverage DMSPs to track research outputs, articles, dataset software related to grants in order to meet funding requirements for public access to research data, as well as to track information about regulated data and ensuring compliance throughout its life cycle, because we do have a number of the security and privacy related data sets where things cannot always be as public, but we wanted to make sure we knew that those were complying with the regulations. And then we wanted to integrate information related to awarded DMSPs bidirectionally with other systems, faculty activity databases, expert profile platforms, grant management systems, the institutional repository, and so forth. Next slide. So these are current and future potential connections among information sources at CU Boulder. This is very complicated. There's so many different things. There's stuff at CU Boulder, there's stuff outside of CU Boulder, and we were tracking all of the different potential connections that existed as part of this and things that we would like to, create better connections and stuff like that. But for this presentation, if we go to the next slide, I'm just going to concentrate on four things that are more generic. So data management and sharing plans, and I messed up that bit. Data sets, articles, and grants. And ideally, all of these are interconnected so that all of them reference each other and can pull data and push data to all of the other things. That's the ideal, but that's not really what happens in real life. Next slide. So problem one was getting access to data management and sharing plans. So we found it difficult and labor intensive to obtain DMSPs not created in DMP tool. So we have access to the back end of DMP tool, and we're able to pull stuff that are from people that are associated with CU Boulder out of that. So we can look at those ones. But the majority of DMSPs that are created are not using DMP tool yet, so we need to promote that more. We're required to get permission from each PI in order to access their DMSPs. Once one has been submitted with a grant, we can't just use it. We can't just get it. We have to ask them each individually, so that created a lot more work for us. And then we need to adhere to the high security standards for certain research projects working with sensitive data, as I said before. Next slide. Problem two was that the published DMSPs are not the final DMSPs. So we have DMSPs that are created using DMP tool, but are not published there. So if someone might be using the DMP tool, they might have created a plan, but they're not publishing it there, and we can still see it, but it's not the final version. Or if they do publish it, it's not necessarily the same version that was submitted to a grant. We found that their researchers are very unlikely to return to their data management plan and sharing plans after the proposal stage, whether that's in DMP tool or one that they just have themselves. So, and there's no easy way for us to tell if a data management and sharing plan was part of a proposal that was awarded or even submitted. So you might have a data management and sharing plan on DMP tool that's published on DMP tool. It says it's for this grant, but you don't know if that would, but we don't know if that was submitted because we have folks that are using this, and then for whatever reason they don't submit the grant proposal, or it's rejected or whatever, but that data management plan is still there, or it might have been changed dramatically, and it's very hard to track that sometimes. Next slide. The next problem was that data sets don't identify grants. So publications like journal articles often acknowledge grants and awards and acknowledgements or similar sections. There's an example on the right there from an article that looks at gives the exact funding information. And many articles also identify published data sets, but published data sets, including software and code, we found rarely say which grants or awards they're associated with. And so this causes a major problem with this. So next slide. So what did we do? So we used a small number of data management sharing plans from funded research projects as test cases. So we uploaded those plans to DMP tool to be able to import stuff from grants to see how that would work. And then we tracked connection points between those data management plans because we knew that they were accepted. We knew that there was a grant associated with it. We knew there were articles associated with them. We knew that there were data sets associated with it. So we could look and find out where all of these were, how we could find them, and where the connection points could be, or where the connection points actually were, and what we could do to improve those in the future. Next slide. So here's one of the examples. So up in the left-hand corner, we have the data management sharing plan in DMP tool. On the top right, we have a data set. In the lower left, we have an article. And in the lower right, we have grant information. So these are all for the same project. And you might notice, hey, all of these have different titles. And that's one of the things that is often a challenge as well, because, when you get a grant, you're not necessarily using the same title as you're going to use for your data set or for the article, or you might have multiple articles, you might have multiple data sets. And that just adds the challenges of tracking this stuff and why the importance of having PIDs to track these and identify them becomes a key part of having these be machine actionable. Next slide. So we found in this example that the article mentions the grant, it mentions the data set. These are in acknowledgements in like text form, so they're not as necessarily as actionable as we might like. The data set, which is down in the bottom lower left-hand corner, mentions the article, and we were able to pull some data from the grant as well for that. So for the data management plan, mentions the data set, and we were able to pull some information from the grant for that. The grant doesn't mention anything because these are often not updated, and so that's going to depend a lot on the grant itself, where that information is and how they're doing it. Some of them do update these things, some of them don't. Some of them are going to say, here's the article or whatever it happens to be, and that's going to vary a lot depending on the granting agency and even the subset of the grant itself. So some of these are going to have connections, some of them aren't, and that's one of the challenges of this. Next slide. Okay, so that's the best case scenario, really. Like we know all the different parts, we know how they fit together, we can go and look at them and find out how things are actually linked. But what's actually happening out there in the real world? So next slide. We get articles that don't mention data or grants. It's still wild to me how common this is, that data will be made available on request, or they just don't mention it at all, or there's just nothing there. There's no acknowledgement that it is funded. Like funding usually is there, but again, that is not always included as well, or it's hard to find. That's one of the other challenges of this, is that we still don't have standards for where this information is included in research articles. Next slide. Data management sharing plans don't mention where the data is going. This is not a real data management and sharing plan, thankfully, but this says, the data will be stored in a specific virtual article, and we made publicly available through the blank. And this is something that when talking with some researchers who are using large language models to create data management sharing plans, they may not necessarily know exactly where it's going to go. And it'll just say, oh, it's going to go into a data repository. Or if they're writing it themselves, they might just know, oh, I don't know where I'm going to put this. It's just going to put wherever. We've also run into the issue where, for example, researchers have written a grant, they've written the data management sharing plan, they've submitted it, and then afterwards we discovered that they've said that they want to put their sensitive data about people or whatever it is, like medical data, into CU Scholar, the institutional repository here at CU Boulder. And we're like, oh, no, you can't do that. So the data management and sharing plan might mention a data repo that the data is not appropriate for as well. So that also happens. Next slide, please. The data sets don't mention anything. This is one that was uploaded to Zenodo this month. And I cannot believe how terrible it is. But this is something that happens very frequently. It's like while we're working with researchers for things in our institutional repository, we can ensure that the data set is curated, that it has titles, that it has authors, that it has all this information, that there's metadata that links out to other things. But this is also very common as well, is that the data set it's published in a general repository and there's no information whatsoever. This one doesn't even have an author, it doesn't have a title, it's called data. Somehow it's been downloaded 48 times. I don't know how that's happened. It doesn't link to an article, and so this is very common as well. Next slide, please. So what can we do? So at CU Boulder, we looked at all these things and we're like, okay, what can we do to try to improve the connections between these different things so that we can link things together and pull information from one system to another? So the first was updating documentation. The second was getting better metadata for data sets in CU Scholar. DataSite DOI metadata, improving connections in CU Boulder infrastructure, a strategy for incomplete research, which is kind of just an emerging thing right now this year that's coming from after this project, but is still something important, and then campus culture. So next slide, please. So we have DMP tool, and we have things in DMP tool. That DMP tool is the thing that helps you create a data management plan, and we have specific information for CU Boulder folks tied to specific grants information, and we're going to try to add specific questions and things about resources to the template so that we don't have people saying, oh yeah, I'm going to put my sensitive medical data into CU Scholar when we don't accept that. So we're hoping to be more specific about what you can and cannot use our resources for and be less generic, and maybe hopefully that will lead to better use of this tool in the future. Next slide. We're also updating our README template. So we have README template that has information that goes with the data sets that we publish in CU Scholar. So we've added a section for funding information, funder name, funder identifier, award name, and so forth. And so that we can say, yes, when we're asking researchers to deposit their data, yes, this is something that we ask for, that it is in our documentation. We don't always expect them to do it, but we hope that they can do it. And even if they don't add it to the documentation at this point, if you go to the next slide, I can't think it's the next slide. Okay, not yet, but also asking for ORCID IDs as well, so that we can connect those in, as that's another PID that can be really key to this. And so this is with DataSite, and being more active in adding more information to DataSite to ensure that when we have issued a DOI for a data set that is in CU Scholar, that we have more information for this. And we're either getting this directly from the researchers, or next slide, pulling this from the CU experts profile pages, so that we know that, yes, this is the ORCID profile for the specific individual, and that we are able to add that into the data set DOI. Next slide. We are also looking to add more funder information to the DOIs. That is something that we hadn't been doing before. So we're adding this in so that it can be pulled out and connected to it, because we're like, you can put an ORCID ID or grant information into a README file, but that's a text file that is just there. It's not being able to be pulled out and used in any other systems, but hopefully by adding it to the DOI metadata, that we can actually use this for the machine actionable part of these projects. Next slide. And so this is the next thing that we've run into this year. What happens when a grant is canceled and there is no article? So next slide. So we have more examples of incomplete research happening. The expectations of a permanence of a federal award database has been damaged and lost this year. So previously we've expected, if something has been issued a grant, it's got a grant ID, we expect that information to always be there, but that's kind of like going away. And we're like, oh, what happens if a grant ID and landing pages are removed or lost or edited or changed? What do we do in those situations? How do we have proof of canceled grants? And that's something we're still working on. But we do have the positive thing of PIs wanting to share their data if a research project is canceled, even without a publication. And so we're looking at, how do we share that? Can we link a data management plan to a data set, even if there is no article, even if the grant information has also disappeared, and making sure that that is available for people to view and use where relevant. Next slide. So the takeaways and future plans for us, we realize that there's no one-size-fits-all solution for institutions using maDMPs. There's lots of different situations for every campus. There is a surprising lack of integration and connection across systems and sources of information. We're looking to improve connections with other units on campus, and we're hoping that we can continue to enhance this collaboration. There's other people still want to work on this project, even though the initial phase of it has finished. And we also realize that absent any policy or mandate requiring maDMPs, we need to demonstrate, articulate the value to PIs and automate as much as possible. And I think that's really the key part of so much of this, is that if we want PIs to work on this and can give us this information, we have to show that the value to them and how this can save them time. Even if it takes a little bit more at the beginning or whatever point it is, it can greatly save them time in the long run by having these things all fit together and connect to each other. Thank you.
All right, thank you both so much, Kat and Matthew. That was fantastic. I'm just gonna close the presentation section with some thoughts on the common themes and findings that we observed across all of our pilot partners as part of this project. And a lot of these observations came from our fall 2024 Machine Actionable DMP tour, where we visited 5 of our pilot campuses, and we ran a series of semi-structured on-site interviews. We did a lot of DMP tool feedback sessions. We spoke with around 22 people from libraries, scholarly communications, from research computing, campus and research IT, grants offices, IRB, human subjects compliance officers. And we were looking at things such as policy and governance, roles, resources, resource allocation, and focusing on existing services and infrastructure and thinking about where these plans could fit into their current research data services and workflows. So our goal was really to gain insights into how each institution envisioned weaving machine actionable DMPs into their workflows. We were looking to surface new integration ideas, to identify gaps in resources, pain points, all this information to help us guide new DMP tool, automation features, and help us inform where we wanted to take this work. So across our pilot partners, we saw a few common highlights and challenges that I think illustrate some of the key takeaways of the program. The first is growing cross-campus collaboration. As we saw from both Kat and Matthew, that a common goal among pilot partners was to use these plans as a vehicle so that we could improve and automate communication between the library and other campus units. So using these plans could save both staff and researchers time, facilitate this more efficient information sharing so that different campus units could coordinate their efforts rather than duplicating labor. There was also a recognition of the library as a key hub and a key player in the research enterprise at the university. So throughout the project, many of our partners used these plans and developing them to help cement the library as the natural meeting point for data-related activities on campus. So using this as a way to showcase their role as a central resource for guidance on implementing data policy, for guidance around best practices. Another theme we saw was around the growing role of AI and how we can balance this with the need for oversight. And this is an issue that we're going to dive a little bit more into detail on in our next webinar. So throughout the project, we did also identify a few major roadblocks that our partners commonly experienced. The unclear or siloed nature of research data management policy at many institutions, minimal oversight and compliance checks of these policies, and an overall lack of institutional data governance. And this is something that I think is present at most institutions and something libraries face regularly, but I think they really became more challenging when we're trying to implement new processes. We're trying to involve cross-unit collaboration. Additionally, like Matthew talked about, the DMPs themselves were also sometimes difficult or impossible for teams to access. That really varied depending on institution. Some had free access to everything, and some had really tough time getting anything. So it was really interesting to see the difference of experience. The ones that they did have access to sometimes were really sparse on details, as we all know, so it was difficult to produce any really usable metadata from them. So looking at our pilot partners overall, I think there are kind of four general pilot tactics that were used around the area, specifically around expediting resource allocation. First, like we saw with Kat's example, connecting to research IT, using that as a way to have all of the information in one system so that they could improve, automate, reduce the back and forth tickets for resource allocation by having that condensed into one system. Penn State also had an ERA integration workflow that they had built out, not built out, planned out. And in this process, every newly funded project would trigger a campus-wide notification. So that would go to data stewards, IRB, storage operations, would get instant heads up that this project had been approved. So that support could be ready and planned for before a project had been started. So on the DMP tool side, we needed to implement some new API features before they could actually build out this workflow. But I think it's still a really great example of a campus-wide notification hub. And my hope is that as we continue to build the API, we're able to address those gaps, and so that we could continue to experiment with these services. So the next one, Arizona, is seen at ASU, and they fed a year of funded plans into a large language model. And this tool that they built out provides feedback on data management plans. So it compares these plans against agency-specific requirements. It utilizes all of the ASU preferred language, information on resource allocation, on security, on repositories. And ASU, Arizona State University, will be talking about this at our next webinar. So if you're interested in learning more about this, please plan on attending. And finally, many of our partners projects really started with people and coordinating across campus units. So as we saw with CU Boulder and Penn State, at Penn State, they started their project by running hands-on workshops, and at those workshops they had libraries, they had IT compliance, research offices, everyone involved in that research enterprise at Penn State. And their goal was to draw a shared service map as a way to start building out this network. And so now that they have created that network, they can help us improve our API so that we can make sure we are able to connect those points in their system. And I think that pre-work was really fundamental towards moving to the more technical side. So following the completion of our active pilot phase of the project, we reached out to all of our partners and we asked if they had any advice for those considering implementing machine actionable DMPs at their institution. And these were some of the common advice given from many of our partners. The first was conduct a campus-wide landscape analysis of all research data touchpoints. So like I mentioned, pilot partners that started their projects by first documenting existing systems, data sources, and all the offices, they were able to identify integration points and assign very clear roles so that they could move forward. Another example of this is at Northwestern University, where they had a campus-wide landscape analysis of all research data touchpoints. So that included Office of Research, sponsored projects, research computing, the Health Sciences Library, main library, IT, IRB, the list goes on. And they were charting everyone who needs DMSP information, when they need it, and in what system does it reside. And so by building out this map, they were able to surface some duplicated efforts. They revealed some missing handoffs of information that were occurring. And importantly, they pinpointed areas that would make good proof of concept examples. I think importantly, it also gave them a roster of advocates and champions that they could continue to collaborate with and ideally have involved in their new quarterly data sharing meetings. Many partners advised starting small. The pilot teams that started with small scale projects were really able to bring to the forefront all of the technical requirements at the beginning, and it helped to build confidence both from the team and from higher ups, and build buy-in before they started on any kind of enterprise or production level work. So teams that focused very clearly on one very small concrete pain point were able to advance quickly. They were able to generate tangible support and evidence And that could lead to rallying broader support. And I think UCR's example is really a perfect one for that. Some teams were able to pivot in their project. So for example, ASU originally were proposing to work with a pretty complicated ERA system integration. They mapped out the process, decided it was very complex, worried it might set some not realistic expectations for services going forward. So instead, they pivoted and stood up that lightweight, very specific AI-driven DMP feedback client. When possible, include administrators and decision makers in the project early on for staff buy-in, for faster development. Make sure you're working with quality DMPs like we've been hearing. Sometimes our projects did stall when plans didn't have enough information, weren't available to teams, required individual requests for access, etc. And finally, I think a major lesson from every team on our program was to demonstrate operational value and to do that very early in the work. So the idea is that a quick visible success or win is able to turn these plans into, or these machine actionable plans, from an abstract idea into something very tangible that an administrator will fund and researchers will actually use. So these concrete gains from examples that we saw were identifying and reducing duplicate data entry, like I mentioned, a lot of notifications to service units, time savings for staff, and expedited time to service for researchers. So these were all essential for sustaining collaboration amongst the units and securing further support for additional development down the road. So now, as I mentioned, we've completed the pilot phase of this project. So the DMP tool team now is focused on improving our API. And one of our primary goals of the project, as I mentioned, was to get people in to learn how people were using and intended on using our API and learn what their pain points were, what they were struggling with, so we could further development. We're currently working with other DMP authoring platforms internationally on a new international standard, API standard, and the idea is that will be used across all DMP services so that tool builders can build one integration that works across multiple platforms. So hopefully we would encourage more integrations rather than having them have to develop bespoke integrations for specific applications. So that wraps up our presentation. If you're interested in learning more, you can check out our webpage. As I mentioned, we have two next webinars in our series. The first is June 3rd at the same time, 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 p.m. This one will cover emerging technologies from the project. And as I mentioned, we'll explore some AI developments related to reviewing DMPs, looking at Arizona State University. And our final webinar on June 17th, at same time, 9 a.m. Pacific, noon Eastern, we'll dig into the DMP tool API, look at how some of the common challenges and how to overcome them. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we are available for any questions.
I can start with one that came in just directed at the host, so people won't be able to see it in the Q&A, while other people hopefully write any other questions they have in the Q&A panel. So one comment that came in, there was we were talking about how there was a discrepancy between the final DMPs and what's in the DMP tool often. And a comment came in about how that often happens because the output of the tool can be longer than 2 pages, and NIH recommends, and some people misinterpret that as required for a DMP to be 2 pages. So people ended up cutting out information. So I thought this is a good comment to share, and I think it brings up a lot of the things that we're talking about in this meeting about using machine actionable DMPs for resource allocation, all the things we want to do. There's a balance between all the information that administrators and people like us want to be able to assign resource allocations. We also heard about how there's often not enough detail in the DMP to do the things that we want. So we want more information, but we don't want it so long that it's burdensome to the researchers either, or just kind of ask for too much that people don't know yet. So there's no easy answer there. That is a balance. But one of my personal hopes to respond here is that as we move towards more structured information for DMPs, if we get DMPs as a template, this is going to involve working with funders to have information that doesn't always have to be in a narrative paragraph. You can hopefully get more information in a way that takes up a lot less space. So that's something that we're working on as kind of a long-term, broader project as part of machine actual plans, is getting, just as an example, when we ask for who's going to manage the data, can we just put in a list of orchids rather than a paragraph? And that would take up a lot less space, help keep things within 2 pages, allow a lot of the things that we're talking about much more easily. So I think there's a lot of work to get to there, and a lot of kind of additional buy-in. But that is the hope of machine actual plans in the long term.
Yeah, one of the other projects I'm working on is with PIDs for scientific instruments and facilities. And that's another place where I think they could really benefit, is like saying, oh, like we're using this facility. Here's the PID that brings you to wherever you need all that information, and you don't have to go fully in depth into it. And so it can be pulled out as well. But also some of these data management and sharing plans that we worked with from the NASA ones are like 30 something pages long. But they changed those because at the same time, because these are supposed to be living documents. They're not supposed to be something like things change in research projects, especially if you're working on them for years and saying, oh, we were going to do this thing, but now we've changed it to something else. And that could be any number of things. And that's where we want these things to be able to link together, so that if they do change where the data is going to go, as an example, that can get updated in the data management plan. So it's now saying, this is where the data set is published, or this is where a different data set is published, or this is a new co-PI that is involved with this project.
Great question.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yep.
Hi everyone. Good to see you guys. So the main part of making DMSP or DMP machine actionable is using PIDs, right? So Matthew just talked about instrument PID. I mean, we have a lot of PIDs integrated. ORCID IDs as an example, and DMP ID is a PID. And if people actually use a output tab and then link their data set, deposit into repository, read data, DOI, those are all good. But there are new emerging, PIDs like, RAID, for example, project in a PID, and then PIDNS or IGSN, that kind of stuff. But I don't know how you plan to incorporate all those available PIDs into the DMP tool. And main issue is that people do not, as you mentioned, people do not go back to DMP tool to track. They don't even change the status, whether it's submitted or planned or anything. And you don't get the output tab unless you publish anyway. So you don't get like a follow-up tab. So that's the main issue. Now with the, DMP2 was originally developed for NSF, but with the NSF moving to their web form without integration with the NSF, I don't know how we're gonna, encourage people to use the DMP2 to write a DMSP for NSF, for example. And for the NIH side, Charlie template was supposed to come out with a DMP tool template, and that one is supposed to match the current ERA Commons for RPPR, which asks basically whether you generate the data. If yes, did you share your data? If yes, where did you share it and what is ROI? Those can be all tracked within DMP tool, much easier if NIH mandate this Charlie template, for example, in DMP2. So those things can really happen if DMP2 works closely with the NIH NSF, and that'll get more buy-in of researchers using DMP2 to write a DMSP and actually use the output tab to track their research outputs. And link, and I did share this with you about the contributor role. Right now, it's not working very well. We only have a 3, and it's very confusing because principal investigator is tied to investigator creditor role, which is not true, because that's more for bench scientists. So they should be connected to conceptualization and like a funding kind of thing. So we have more work to do.
Like,
Yeah.
not everything needs to be linked to the data management and sharing plan. Things can be linked to a data set, and then the data set can be linked to other things as well. But we just want to have more connections between the data management sharing plan and some of the other, like the publications and some of the other stuff as well. So and we don't know exactly what's going to become the standard, but we're trying out different things right now to see what we can make the best connections with and what works best for each. And as I said at the end of my presentation, every institution is going to be different as well. And some institutions are going to be like, we need this one thing, and other institutions are like, we don't care about that one.
Right. I mean, it's down
Actually,
the road.
I would like to comment on what you just said, Matthew, in terms of like every institution is going to be different, because I'm absolutely seeing that there's a different research infrastructure from what I was used to at UC Riverside, and who I was able to talk to and connect with to make all of the make that project happen. And now I'm at an R2 Fresno State. We do research. It's at a different level, and the campus infrastructure is different. And I want to connect that with something that was one of the follow-ups that Maria had. And it has to do with like human networks and I've read somebody that they mentioned it, like human infrastructure, right? That part is so critical. Before we can ever do anything else, each institution has to have that human infrastructure in place. And yeah, and what Matthew said, that like what we were doing here was like, well, let's test it out, because everything needs to start with the first step. And that's how I see that this project is. This is the first step. And really thank you for letting me be part of the project of doing that. I think it's great what we were all able to find.
Rachel asked, are there data repositories of PIDs? And some of them definitely do. And some of them are just going to have PIDs for the specific data set. But that is something to look at when you're looking at an maDMSP, saying I'm going to publish in this specific repository. Here's the PID for that repository would be a useful thing to have, I think.
Yeah, I will just add, and thank you for all these great questions, that we have, for the past few years, been working to add as many PIDs to the DMP as possible. We're now working on a rebuild, which will make it much easier for us to add new PIDs, for our partners to have more control over formatting their own templates and using those. So I think it's something we are definitely trying to remain in strong support. It's key to everything we're trying to build. So we're certainly, eager to add as many PIDs as possible, if that answers your question, Sunyoung.
I mean, you guys done so much, and I love, pilot project. I wanted to participate, but I didn't get to do it. But I think it's just a long-term goal, and it's going in the right direction. I just put it in a Q&A. If you can share us what kind of PIDs do you plan to integrate in the near future? I mean, right now DOI is supported, ORCID is supported. Is it ROAR supported, or RIDs, and pittance? I don't know if it's a finalized or RAID, that kind of stuff. So I'm sure you write a blog about it when you release a new DMP2. I can't wait to see it. Then that'd be really helpful. And really follow-up tab, I wish people would use that, but it's not well recognized. I know you guys are integrate with3data.org for repository, for example, but it's It's a little glitchy at the moment, so.
Let me jump in on that because we're about at time. I think mainly we plan to continue supporting the PIDs and try to integrate them more. So we do use ROAR. We use ROAR already in the DMP tool primarily for assigning affiliations when people sign up and for managing organizations and linking from the affiliations. ORCID integration is a big one. I think RAID that you mentioned is something we're considering how to integrate for the future. Probably wouldn't be in the first version, but definitely something we're keeping an eye on. And the research outputs tab, I think one exciting little preview for people that we're still working on, so things could change, but we're trying to integrate that more as part of the template itself instead of this extra tab that can be confusing or get lost. And the hope is if we make that a more full-featured research outputs table people can create as a DMP, that encourage people as templates to use that more structured format for things. So we're still developing exactly what that's going to look like. And we're hoping to deepen the integrations with PIDs that we already have, for example, in finding related works out in the wild, using the PIDs that people are entering to try to connect things across the ecosystem.
So
And
one
there's
last
also
question.
importing stuff from the
Yeah.
grants specifically. And so once a grant has been awarded, taking that ID information and pulling from the grant websites into the data management plan to connect them in that way.
Sure. And then right now we have our outputs tab, which exists, and follow-up tab we get only after you connect to the ORCID ID, right? And are we merging those two then in the new version? Because the output tab is actually planning stage. People use it. Okay, this is what I plan to do. But you get follow-up tab where you can actually put the output of the approved DMSP, but you don't get it unless you connect it to the ORCID ID and then issue a DMP ID. So that's why most people don't have it. Yeah.
You do have to publish your DMP in order to see that, and I think that the workflows hopefully will be improved with our new DMP tool. We've been working on it for a number of years, done lots and lots of feedback sessions, and really focusing on how we can better automate and track some of these changes to a DMP over time. So it's certainly our goal. We are actually over time, so I want to respect everyone's time and thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Questions.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and so sign up for our next webinar if you're interested in following more. Take care, everyone.